Today I'm going to talk about my moral philosophy. Our moral philosophy it shapes everything, every aspect of our lives. It is both a lens that shapes how we see the world, and it is shaped by how we experience our world. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to explain what my fundamental principles are, what the fundamental principles that guide my morality are, how they shape my understanding of human nature, and the virtues that I think are essential to morality. So fundamental principles are the principles, the rules, the facts, the ideas, the theologies, the theories that shape the rest of your view of morality. They are the things in which everything else is deduced from, it, the basis for everything. Several principles that I think are very fundamental to what I believe are that God exists, that He created us in His image, and that immoral things are the opposite of what is His nature. So they're opposite to His perfect nature. For instance, He is just. He is just. He gives us the ability to know what we deserve and what we don't deserve. So ignoring the rights and what people deserve is the opposite of what God's nature. I think the biggest influence, the biggest religious influence on my moral philosophy can be seen in my beliefs on God. And my beliefs about human nature also stem from that. But I also think I've built, it's not that I take what religion says for the way it is. I made my own opinion about it and based it on those teachings, not just taking them for what they are told to me, how they're told to me. One of the people we talked about was William Baxter, and he was making an argument that pollution is a benefit to humanity, that it is taking it away completely would be harmful to humanity. And while I don't agree completely with, as we talked about, I don't completely agree with everything he said, I do think his point that a no pollution movement would be harmful to humanity was pretty true. This doesn't mean it is accurate for right now. And what I guess I'm saying is that while yes, we are responsible for what we do with our environment, we are responsible for how the environment is impacted by what we do, we can't ignore the fact that everything we do impacts the environment in some way. It's not whether or not, I think, in my opinion, it's not whether or not we impact the environment, but how we do so prudently, how we choose to do so, and how we choose to limit that. Because there is a balance between just doing everything we want, ignoring the impact, and letting that impact tear us apart and control us. Everything we do has to not impact the environment, which is nearly impossible because any change, even slight changes, like a house, for example, will change the environment because of the materials and the disruption to the ecosystem that involves. Another thing I think is a fundamental principle is that based off those fundamental principles, I should say, is my belief in human nature and about human nature. And humanity is created in God's image. And I believe that therefore we share His characteristics. We have a lot of the same characteristics, even though not perfectly, but we do. We have an inherent sense of what is right, what is just, what is true, what is good. And He created us in His image, and so therefore we are in His image. We are a reflection of what He is. We are selfish. Humanity is selfish in of itself. But we also have a desire to be better, to be perfect. We just also kind of realize that is a futile, at least to a degree, a futile thing, and we struggle to sometimes figure out why we think something is wrong or right. We just know that it is. I do think, like several philosophies we studied talked about how there's very little surface level evidence that we are not anything but selfish, because the world is a very selfish, a very corrupt place. And when I was thinking about it, I realized something that I don't know if they didn't really talk about. They were like, either you're selfish or you're unselfish. It's one or the other. And what I think it is that it's not that we don't have an inherent sense of what is right and to be unselfish, but we also have the selfish desire, and without certain training, without certain principles being instilled at us, and depending on the situation we grow up in and the world around us and our experience in it, we may not learn to listen to that voice. We may learn to ignore it, to suppress it, because it is considered wrong in our culture, or it just doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit the world we live in, which is not really anybody's fault. It's what happened as a result of the fall, and that is just the way it is. Now, is this the way it should be? No, it's not. But that is the world we live in. The third thing I wanted to talk about was the essential virtues that I think are important for living a good life. So first we have to recognize that a virtue is a means between two vices, the extreme lack of something and the extreme presence of something. One of the examples I came up with was you can be a coward or you can be reckless. But in the middle, somewhere, is being courageous. A coward lacks any courage at all. He or she is controlled by their fear. Someone who is reckless doesn't listen to their fear at all, doesn't even acknowledge that there's any danger in what they're doing, and just acts like they're bulletproof and foolproof all the time. While a courageous person recognizes the danger, recognizes the possible consequences of what they're doing, sees their fear, and chooses to overcome it within reason. I mean, nobody just jumps off a cliff without having a plan for how you're not going to get dashed on the pavement. Unless, of course, you're being super reckless. But also, I don't know why you jump off a cliff, but that's a whole nother thing. So one of the other things we talked about was the cardinal and theological virtues, and I felt like these were pretty sound. I feel like there were a couple things with virtue ethics that I didn't quite agree with, because there was a few holes missing, and there was a few things missing, but I felt like it was the closest thing to what I believe. And some of the examples I came up with, other than the courage one, was that you can't really have one of them without the other, because you can't use pleasure correctly if you don't have a good sense of what you and others deserve. If you don't have a good sense of justice, then you can't use your pleasures correctly, because you will inevitably do what you want to do more than and ignore what others deserve, which then is not, I think it's temperance. No, it's not temperance if you are doing something that hurts somebody else, even if it is pleasing you. And then another one was that I felt it was a good example of why these these virtues are inseparable, is that facing difficulty well is impossible to do without being able to choose well, being prudent, and having a loving, supporting group, knowing the virtue of love. You can't persevere on your own. And I think actually it was something that was kind of mentioned in Viktor Frankl's part. Is one of the things he said, it was that you can't survive a big tragedy without having a reason to survive it, and reminders of what that reason is. And I feel like in my own life that it's not just being able to choose well because we have a purpose, because we have a reason, we have a goal, one, which then we can choose to do the best thing to achieve that goal. But you also have to people around you to remind you that this isn't hopeless. You will live through this somehow, one way or another. And that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that God knows and sees you. You need reminders of that, and built a loving community will help with that. And then there was also, I found interesting in some of the stuff we discussed was categorical imperative. And I like the idea that it is based on, that we shouldn't do something we wouldn't will someone else to do. But where I think it kind of fell through for me was when it basically, to use an example, said lying to protect somebody is the same in all situations. Period. Like, if you would lie to protect somebody, then you must will that everybody will lie to protect somebody. Or that everybody can lie. And I find that to be a little bit inflexible, because no two situations are alike. No two circumstances are exactly the same. They often will have similar principles, but none of them are the same. So I think that is the problem with that. I still would say you should not do something in a situation where you would not also have someone else do that same thing. Like, if you would not write your heroic character who is a perfect person in every way to do what you are doing, like if the person you want to be wouldn't do what you are doing, then yes, I would say you wouldn't want to necessarily do it. But I also realize that there are a lot of times where you are put in a position where you really are choosing two not really great options. You only have 2 choices, only 5 choices, and they're all not so great, like with the trolley example we talked about. So then you are faced with, okay, which one is the least immoral? Which one is less negative? And I think that's where you have to, where it kind of is a problem if you say, well, everybody should kill 1 person instead of killing 5. Just because I think I should trigger the trolley over to kill the 1 person instead of letting it hit the 5. And yet, I don't think that would always necessarily be the case. Granted, that's a very, very extreme example, but we have been dealing with extreme examples all semester. And then, so, I mean, this is a very brief overview of what my moral philosophy is, but I have done my best to describe the fundamental principles of what my moral philosophy, and I talked a little bit about how it has shaped my view of human nature and some of the examples of essential virtues that I find that you need for a moral life. I think a moral philosophy isn't really something you can just learn in a class. It is ingrained in who you are and it is what you think, it is who you want to become, how you act. But I do think a class can help you recognize what your moral philosophy is, help you explain it better, help you see others' perspectives, see how others think of things. And I do think it can influence what you think. I think there are things that I learned in this class that I will take going forward, things I maybe not even had thought of. And I do think that's something very interesting, is that it's less about, hey, here's how to think, and more of, here is how you think, are you sure this is the way you want to think? And here are some other examples of what people think as well. And I think it challenges you to learn more about yourself, which I think is a very, very important thing.